Cuba is suffering the worst fuel shortage in years. The situation is so bad that the government canceled Monday's traditional May Day parade because there's not enough fuel for people to travel into the city. Lines at gas stations are now stretching for miles in some places, and all this while the station itself has no gas. Cuba does have its own oil, but has difficulties refining it. No official reason given so far for shortages, but there have been fewer exports from Venezuela to Cuba. And more than 50 countries are in Havana for Cuba's tourism fair. Cuba hopes it will help relaunch its tourism industry, which was hit hard by the pandemic. Here's Luis Chirino.
This year, the tourism fair aims to promote the island's culture and heritage, along with other attractions through the launch of new products, excursions, and visits to different sites. The fair underway at Havana's Morro Cabana Historic Complex comes as the island tries to boost tourism. In 2019, before the pandemic, there were about 4.5 million visitors to Cuba. It was just a fraction of that in 2020. The freefall continued in 2021 with little over 365,000 visitors. The signs of recovery have begun. Cuba expects to receive 3.5 million visitors this year. New hotels are giving shape to the island skyline, while other tourist facilities are getting upgrades. Tourism experts here say the fair takes place as the local economy faces challenges.
Encuentra muchos factores.
The fair faces inconveniences, like a crisis in resource supply chains for our best tourist destinations, and U.S. economic and financial restrictions on the external side. And domestically, we have inflation, shortages, and we lack appropriate linkage between the public and the private production and service sectors.
Perello said Cuba must prioritize sun and beach attractions because tourists in these post-pandemic times need destinations that guarantee sanitary, physical integrity, and environmental safety. Tourism experts say the island has a lot of potential as a go-to destination. Speaking with reporters at the fair, the Cuban tourism minister said that along with the usual tourists from places like Canada and Europe, Cuba hopes to attract visitors from new markets.
Estamos también dando una mirada para rescatar.
We are also trying to rescue the Latin American region by working with tour operators to bring Latin American tourists.
The International Tourism Fair promotes the cultural and ancestral values of the Caribbean island, while also playing a pivotal role in Cuba's economic revival. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
Joining me now to talk more about Cuba's economy, Remi Piet, the senior partner at Embellie Advisory. Good to see you joining us from Miami. The Cuban economy, first, let me get to the fuel shortage thing. How serious is that?
Well, hi, Phil. Thank you for the invitation. No, it is a severe conditions right now in Cuba. I mean, you're having reduced imports from Venezuela in terms of higher quality crude oil that are needed to be, mixed with the Cuban lower grade oil. And as a result, there's only 2/3 of the oil needed that is actually present in the country. You have long lines of cars waiting sometimes days to be able to access, the gas stations. And this obviously has a very strong impact both on the, overall economy of Cuba and definitely in terms of the tourism sector is severely hit by this.
Is it a short-term problem that can be fixed, or is there something longer term that's going to cause some real challenges?
It's probably a mix of both, but definitely there are some longer-term trends there. Definitely Venezuela has trouble meeting its objective in terms of ensuring the exports to Cuba. There's also incentive to sell to buyers that pay in cash on this today global energy market. And so as a result, the shortages from Venezuela is something that is probably structural. And as a result, Cuba needs to find other solutions in terms of its use of gasoline and be able to power its economy differently. But it's going to take some time to be able to channel those solutions, and it's unlikely it's going to be happening in the short term.
As you know, Global Business and CGTN has been covering Cuba for some time now. And it seemed to me over the past few years there was real traction in them sort of normalizing relations really with the rest of the world. And I'm also talking about the United States. And I'm wondering, do you feel like that momentum may have been lost over the past couple of months because of this shortage and for a variety of geopolitical reasons?
Well, I mean, Cuba always had trouble diversifying its economy, and obviously because of the ideological system in place, that doesn't help, private entrepreneurship in different sectors. Tourism was a good opportunity to try to manage this, but unfortunately, you look at the level of tourism attracted by the region for different reasons. You're arriving to 40% of pre-pandemic times. On the side of the island, Dominican Republic actually has a very attractive offer for international tourists. It is actually taking more of a precedence in terms of the development of that sector in the Caribbean, and this suffers, creates more suffering for Cuba in the longer term. Diaz-Canel has been trying to diversify the economy with investment towards the extractive sectors, but the traditional actors and partners of Cuba are not exactly in a position geopolitically to take a further position in the region.
But there could be changes. I've heard rumors of potentially loosening things up, if you will, between Cuba and say the United States, and that would obviously help tourism. What do you think needs to happen for things to be better 6 months from now? Is it up to the Cuban government? Is it a exterior foreign institution that needs to step in, or can they handle this on their own?
No, I mean, it's interesting to look at the Biden administration position towards Cuba that has been less open than the Obama previous one. But there are definitely conversations that needs to be taken. There's no interest in having Cuba suffering dire situation economically and further exodus of population, usually through Nicaragua, and that has actually opened its doors to Cuban immigration that's then trickled down Central America up to the U.S. So it's a global perspective that needs to be integrated here. You don't want Cuba to turn like another Haiti, for example. So you want to, and we're far from there. Obviously, the structures in Cuba are much stronger than in Haiti. But there's questions of being able to talk with other actors. There's been some moves between the U.S. administration and Venezuela more widely in terms of energy security, to which Cuba could actually try to participate maybe and ask for participation to the next future Forum of the Americas that would be led by the.
What about, look, I speak to people in our newsroom, I speak to people in other newsrooms, and universally everybody has Cuba on their list of a place they want to visit someday. Some have already visited. And I have to think that we aren't the only ones, right? There are people all over the world that have Cuba on their list. And specifically, South America. Where is South America in its relationship to help Cuba here?
No, I mean, you're looking at a series of potential tourists, as you in the documentary was mentioning, coming from Latin America, some of the potential new markets from there. But those populations that travel internationally usually are going more towards the U.S. on that level of segment of population. Traditionally, the interesting population traveling to Cuba has been European of nature, but and after the pandemics, European tourists try to stay closer to home over the last few years. So there are some trends that might change into the near future. Cuba has a beautiful potential in terms of the tourism industry, in terms of the quality of well-being of its people, in terms of social conditions and policies also. So there is some interesting reason to go and visit or even spend time in Cuba. That there needs to be a normalization of foreign policy towards different actors. There might be an opportunity right now with China taking a lead in terms of conflict resolution, the U.S. having a Democrat administration, although the elections are coming near. So there might be a tight window to actually open talks and ease the tension on the Cuban economic system.
Remi, we're going to stay positive. I hope you're right. I hope they solve this oil crisis. And of course, there's a long line of tourists that would like to see this be fixed so they can go visit. Remi, good to see you. Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Phil.
All right.